Good day, folks, and welcome to another edition of Lumberjack Logic. I'm your host, Neil Johnson. We're going to go to a pretty in-depth report here. Stick with it through the end. At the end of this, you're going to understand how Trump has won the entire negotiation, what Putin is really like, what Zelensky's really like, regime change in Ukraine. You're going to understand it all and how it relates to the current events. And then you are going to hear the ambassador from Britain basically say Zelensky needs to go along with everything Trump says. This is just an absolutely wild report. Remember, subscribe if you're new, smash that like, and check out my sponsor, MyPillow, mypillow.com. Use promo code Lumberjack for big savings.
And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Yes, the internet is lighting up with all kinds of that type of activity right now. But I want you to look at this. This is before and after the Ukraine crisis. So here you have two headlines from The Guardian. One is, "Welcome to Ukraine, the most corrupt nation in Europe. After the crisis in Ukraine, the fight for Ukraine is a fight for liberal ideas." You can go right on down the line. Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem out of Reuters. Then Reuters is for foreign fighters. Ukraine offers purpose, camaraderie, and cause, and so on. So the liberal media just seems to go along with the current thing, whatever that current thing is. But remember back in 2014, they wanted regime change. And so let's listen to Secretary of State Victoria Nuland talk with Jeffrey Pyatt, two top-ranking officials in the U.S. government, just casually discussing regime change in Ukraine.
Questions of credibility are being raised after a private chat between two top U.S. diplomats was leaked online.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
So we've been meddling in the affairs of Ukraine for a long time. In fact, it was even before 2014. It goes back to 2004. That clip was from Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire, which I highly recommend you watch. It's available on YouTube if you want to get a broader understanding of Ukraine and the situation and the Nazis and everything else over there. But we have a situation now where the Andriy Yermak, the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, started talking about opening relations with China and how they're just going to go to China. Now, don't let your blood boil as you watch this because we've sent them hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm going to show you how all of this tough talk is not only futile, it's actually hampering their efforts.
Foreign affairs, we appreciate it. We are very much interested to have the strong relations with the China, and we think it's time to arrange the meetings between our leaders. I think it's momentum. It's momentum because China can play important role in the peace process.
Now, here's the thing. Ukraine can talk tough. Europe can talk tough. But it doesn't matter because I want you to look at this. The country sending the most aid to Ukraine, and we're missing some of this money here, too. So they've got it down as $119.2 billion. EU institutions at 52.1 and so on. But the bottom line is you look at this, and there is no way this thing works without the U.S. involvement. In fact, NATO doesn't work. Look at this. Of the $1.3 trillion in NATO defense spending, the United States is spending $860 billion of that money. We far surpass everybody else and everybody else combined. So they need the U.S. And as they continue to erode support with President Trump, they have eroded support with our populace, and President Trump knows that. Check this out.
Holy Toledo. Look at this trend line here. U.S. support for Ukraine is too much. Back when the war began, back in February of 2022, it was just 7%. Up like a rocket ship. My goodness. Up now in February of 2025 to 41%. And the clear majority of Republicans, and of course Republicans are in charge of the U.S. government now, 62% of Republicans say that the U.S. support for Ukraine is too much. What a difference from just 3 years ago. I can remember, John, all those backyards in the United States with those Ukrainian flags. Far fewer of them today, as Americans' opinions on Ukraine have changed dramatically.
What about opinions of the Ukrainian president?
Right. Obviously, if you would expect changes amongst the public on feelings towards Ukraine, feelings towards Zelensky have changed also dramatically. Look at this. Confident Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. Back in 2022, it was the clear majority, 72% through the floor. through the floor by 2024. Just 48% of Americans say that they're confident that Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. And GOP confidence has also plummeted dramatically. Now the clear majority of Republicans are not confident that Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. Really a real trend line, ones you rarely see in the American public when it comes to Ukraine and Zelensky. Confidence in both going down through the ground.
Look, some allies of President Trump have targeted Zelensky with harsh criticism over the last few years, and it could be that that's having some impact here.
Absolutely. The Republican establishment, the Republican electorate has moved as the Republican establishment and Republican leaders have moved on.
All right, let's talk about the idea of a peace deal. And again, the way you ask this matters, but go ahead.
The way you ask it is important, so we can talk about this a little bit. So the poll question essentially is, do you support a Russia-Ukraine negotiated peace deal? The vast majority of Americans, this is what they want. 78% say that they support this idea versus just 16% oppose.
So you can see the support for Zelensky in Ukraine has crumbled as more information comes out. One point that he did get wrong is he said, the Republican base has come around as the Republican establishment has. No, the Republican establishment came around as the Republican base told them to. That's why we elected Trump. It was clear that we wanted to end this deal in Ukraine. We didn't want to keep sending our money over there, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars actually, when we can't help hurricane victims here at home. And the events that led up to Zelensky disrespecting our president and vice president in the White House actually was a trail of disrespect from two previous meetings, as you'll hear here from Scott Besson.
Margaret, it is impossible to have an economic deal without a peace deal. The sine qua non for an economic deal is that Ukrainian leadership wants a peace deal.
I thought this was a building block towards getting to a peace deal.
It was supposed to be, but President Zelensky came into the Oval on Friday. There were three things that were going to be done. There was going to be a press conference. There was going to be a private lunch with 16 of us. And as you could see from Dan Scavino's the post on his X account, we were already set up to sign the deal. So it's unclear now. President Zelensky has thrown off the sequencing. And Margaret, let me tell you the most tragic part of this. The President Trump's idea for this economic arrangement was to further intertwine the American people and the Ukrainian people and show no daylight, to show the Russian leadership that there was no daylight. And President Zelensky came into the Oval Office and tried to relitigate in front of the world the deal. And the place to have done it would have been in the private lunch.
So Scott Besson is talking about the sequencing of those meetings at the White House. But Volodymyr Zelensky had already thrown off the sequence through two other meetings where he overslept. Yes, overslept for a meeting with Scott Besson to sign the deal. And then he was supposed to meet again with Marco Rubio in Munich. Both times he delayed it so he could then come over here and sign it in the Oval Office. Trump brings the cameras in. This was no ambush. Zelensky set this all up through his actions. And then Zelensky wouldn't sign the deal. In fact, he tried to relitigate it in front of the American public. This is a stark contrast to Putin. And we're going to go back to something that Bill Clinton had to say about Vladimir Putin. This is wild, very eye-opening. Check this out.
Effort to get the Syrian government to declare, disclose, and then hand over their chemical weapons. We'd be crazy not to take advantage of this.
But it's something, the old saying though, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is too good to be true. Can we really believe that Vladimir Putin, with his own self-interest for Russia, is orchestrating this huge maneuver to remove all of Assad's chemical weapons, and it's just going to happen?
No, we don't have to believe it. We just have to see what happens and make the most of what happens. You work for the best and prepare for the worst in this business. But I think it would be a terrible mistake not to take advantage of the opportunity. And, look, Mr. Putin he's very smart.
Well, you know him better than most people.
Yeah, I do.
What was he like behind closed doors, away from, the sort of the public utterances?
Smart and remarkably, we had a really good, blunt relationship.
How blunt?
Brutally blunt.
Ever fisticuffs?
No, but I think the right strategy most of the time is, but it's frustrating to people in your line of work. You should be brutally honest with people in private And then if you want them to help you, try to avoid embarrassing them in public.
Right.
Now, sometimes they do things which make it impossible for you to keep quiet. But by and large, I found all the people I dealt with appreciated it if I told them the truth. How I honestly felt and what our interests were and what our objectives were. And they also appreciated it when I didn't kick them around in public for as long as I couldn't kick them around. So, that's my experience. And
did Putin ever renege on a personal agreement he made to you?
He did not.
So behind closed doors, he could be trusted?
He kept his word in all the deals we made.
So President Putin was able to keep his word. I would wager he wouldn't oversleep for meetings either. I'm serious. I mean, I think President Putin is a serious enough guy. He's going to actually show up for the meetings. Vlad is the worst representative of Ukraine. We can talk all we want about how Russia's an aggressor and Russia's this, Russia's that. But the reality is you don't have a serious leader in Ukraine, in Zelensky. And in fact, I mean, we've seen the videos of him dancing around in high heels and whatnot. He's just not a serious guy. He's a lightweight. And I think everybody cares about people dying. Nobody wants to see people die. That's why we want to see a peace. We don't want to see people dying in Ukraine. We don't want to see our people dying. But Vlad told us our citizens would die. Do you remember this clip?
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight because it's nature that we're talking about, and they will be dying.
Yeah, I know. The guy says the most outlandish things. But I want you now to hear the British ambassador to the U.S. and what he has to say about what Vlad needs to do. This is wild. This is the Trump effect.
Lord Manderson, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard Secretary Rubio there. Your response?
My response is that we need a very radical reset, as you say in the caption behind you. And the reset has to consist of the United States and Ukraine getting back on the same page, and President Zelensky giving his unequivocal backing to the initiative that President Trump is taking to end the war and to bring a just and lasting peace to Ukraine. And the Europeans, George, too, they need to back the calls for a ceasefire. And by the way, I think that Ukraine should be the first to commit to a ceasefire and defy the Russians to follow. And then as part of the unfolding plan for this negotiation, the Europeans and perhaps some other countries too have got to consider how they are going to put forces on the ground to play their part in providing enduring security and deterrence for Ukraine. Now, that's the reset that we're looking for. That's what the British Prime Minister is working for in his meeting in London today.
And if there's been any progress yet, I know the meetings are going on right now, but you seem to suggest that it's up to the Ukrainians first to come forward and say yes?
Well, look, after what happened on Friday, it's clear that we need to bring the United States and Ukraine back together again. And I think the first thing that President Zelensky can do is to make clear his commitment to the initiative that President Trump is taking. And yes, I do think it would be a good idea if he signed the economic and commercial deal put forward by the United States. And the reason I say that is quite apart from the economic gain that Ukraine will derive from that, it will also give the United States a stake in Ukraine's future. It will mean that U.S. commercial interests, U.S. individuals, citizens will be on the ground there, and that will be an even greater added incentive for the U.S. to protect the Ukraine in future and make sure that war does not ensue again. That's what I want to see. That's what we all want to see. It takes both the United States and Ukraine to come together and make sure that this whole initiative is given the best possible likelihood of success. Because, George, it is the only show in town.
See, President Trump's agreement for the rare earth minerals is the only game in town. And this is the one that will put American citizens on the ground, and we will not stand for Putin taking on American citizens. That's something that America will get behind. So if Ukraine wants to see support numbers rise for Ukraine, it's the only game in town. But see, Europe has a much larger problem. And I want to turn to Tulsi Gabbard, who went on Fox News, so we can see exactly. This is why what J.D. Vance did over in Munich was so big.
What do you make of Russia celebrating and saying what the U.S. is doing lines up with their vision?
They're going to say what their position is. What we should pay attention to here in the United States of America is the American people, so many people across the country celebrating the strong leadership that President Trump and Vice President Vance demonstrated in the Oval Office, something we have not seen over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, where we finally have a president who's going to stand up strongly and fiercely and unwaveringly for the cause of peace and freedom for the American people. I know that that is who President Trump has on his heart and on his mind as he is working towards bringing about a negotiated end to this war.
How many of you are excited, let me know in the chat, about somebody standing up for America's interests? President Trump putting the American people and America's interests first, because Europe has its own problems, and Tulsi's going to call those out. Again, this is why what J.D. Vance did in Munich was so big.
I think those who are criticizing his efforts in this way are showing that they are not committed to peace. And in the case of many of those European countries, that they're not committed to the cause and values of freedom. Even though they speak of this, we heard very clearly during Vice President Vance's speech in Munich different examples of how these European partners and longtime allies in many cases are actually implementing policies that undermine democracy, that shows that they don't actually believe in the voices of the people being heard, and implementing anti-freedom policies. We're seeing this in the United Kingdom. We're seeing this in Germany. We saw it with the tossing out of the elections in Romania. So there's something fundamentally deeper here that shows a huge difference in divergence between the values that President Trump and Vice President Vance are fighting for, the values that are enshrined in our Constitution, the interests of the American people in our peace and freedom and national security, versus those of many of these European countries who are coming to Zelensky's side as he walked out of the White House, saying basically that they are going to support him in continuing this war and that they don't stand with us around these fundamental values of freedom.
See, Europe lecturing us is not going to work, because we've seen the videos coming out of England. We've seen the videos coming out of Germany. They're literally arresting people over memes on the internet, because some people say, hey, we don't want these open borders. So those fundamental values, see, when America's strong, the world wins. When America's Constitution is strongly enshrined here at home, those freedom values can go abroad.
Well, and they also, though, think that they're in more alignment, and they should be, with the U.S. when it comes to those freedoms and things you talk about. Certainly those are not things that you would say that Russia or Putin celebrates or bestows on his own people.
That's correct. I would not make that claim, and it's clear that that's not the case, nor does President Trump. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about many of these European countries and Zelensky himself, who claim to be standing and fighting for the cause of freedom and democracy, when we actually look at what's happening in reality in these countries, as well as with Zelensky's government in Ukraine, is the exact opposite. You have the canceling of elections in Ukraine. You have political parties being silenced or even criminalized or thrown in prison. You have the freedom of religion, churches being shut down. You have political opposition being silenced. You have total government control of the media. We could go down a whole laundry list of issues that are against the values of democracy and freedom. So it really begs the question, as Vice President Vance said again in Munich, it's clear that they're standing against Putin. Obviously, that's clear. But what are they actually really fighting for? And are they aligned with the values that they claim to hold in agreement with us?
I love what she has to say here, because they try to make Putin a comic book villain. You know, so Putin bad, and then Zelensky good. But it's not that simple, is it? Because Europe and Zelensky have been eroding the freedoms of their citizens. So then the question is, okay, so Putin's not necessarily good, but is Europe and Zelensky good? That's the question one has to ask. And then are you going to give them unilateral support? unbending, uncompromising, an open checkbook for all time. And the American citizens don't want that. Donald Trump is standing up to that. And actually, when America wins, when America's values go to the forefront, see, if America falls, the world falls. That's why President Trump's election was so important. That's why all of this is so important, folks. So please make sure you subscribe. Smash that like on your way out. Check out my sponsor, MyPillow. Great deals going on over there and free shipping. But folks, this is the great American comeback.